Welcome back to the Business Wingmen Show. I'm Steve Smith, your host. I'm joined by Travis Smith, my co-host and trusty partner of all things edgy and introspective. And certainly we're going to be getting into some of that today because the topic we've chosen is something that has become very, very topical in nature. You hear it talked about on the news and every once in a while you see it in the paper. But I think this is a lot deeper topic that some people have real problems with. So we thought we'd explore it. And so the topic is going to be word salads. Okay. You've heard that term before. It's been pinned to certain politicians. We're not going to get into the political spectrum. We're going to stay away from that. We're going to talk more about the humanistic side of what are word salads? Where'd that word come from and what causes it? And so hopefully if you're, working with somebody that has a problem with word salading, or you yourself have been caught in that, then you'll kind of know what to do. So Travis, I know we've been kind of passing back and forth some information, some research about this. You made a comment this morning on an email that you sent me that I thought was really interesting. And I want you to kind of explain that a little bit. You said that you thought word salads were associated with a certain type of thinking or behavior. And now based on what we've uncovered, you're kind of thinking differently about what that word means. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, yeah, happy to. But I think we should start off by defining what word salad is, because if someone's listening to this discussion, they're like, well, what the hell is that? Never heard that term before. It might be helpful for us to kind of.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. So yeah, go ahead. Give it your best shot.
I would really love to use a political example right now because it's just very mainstream at this point, but we're not a political show. So we'll
right.
go there. That said, as I have always heard word salad, when I've seen it in action, it's someone who's beating around the bush and can never get to the freaking point. They've literally been waxing on for 5 minutes about something. They've not addressed the central topic or answered the question, but damn if they didn't talk forever about really nothing, but their mouth was flapping the whole time, saying a bunch of things that either A, didn't make sense or didn't get to the point.
Yeah, and that's certainly a very vivid symptom of what happens when somebody's engaged in word salad speak. For me,
or as we learned, schizophasia.
Yeah, schizophrenia. Yeah, that's aphasia. You're right. To me, word salading is a kind of a temporary cognitive breakdown. Your language is all developed from the front part of your brain. So when you have a breakdown in that area and you start spewing out words and phrases that don't go together and don't assemble any kind of meaning for which the person that you're talking to is completely confused, you've just thrown a word salad on them.
Well, I love the definition. I don't know where you got this from, but the definition of confused or unintelligible mixture of seemingly random phrases.
Right.
It's like,
right.
Yeah, I mean that.
Well, so, all right. So getting back to my question about, your kind of revelation over this, talk a little bit about that.
Oh, revelation. So as I had mentioned before, when I at least my attempt was to describe what word salad is as kind of more of an urban phrase, right? I always really looked at it as people who are doing that, it's an incompetence thing. In terms of the way they speak, the way that they communicate, they just can't get to the freaking point. I mean, brevity is not their friend.
Right.
And we've all seen this.
Right.
And it's like you get matched up with the person, even if it's not a formal meeting. You know how you ever go to a networking event and you just somehow get next to that person who just talks on and on and on about some shit that you don't care about.
Right.
But it's
when they get up and introduce themselves, they essentially do the same thing.
Yeah.
They're the ones you have to kind of pull the microphone away or put the hook around them or do something to shut them up. Right.
Right. So that's how I've always looked at it. And again, short and sweet, it's an incompetence thing. It's like they can't get to the point. They can't make sense of their topic, their argument, their discussion, whatever it is. But what you sent me earlier today, in all fairness, I just never looked at it that way, which was people who are utilizing the tactic of word salad, and I think that's fair to say a tactic,
yes,
that it's a manipulation, that they're doing that on purpose to divert or not address some sort of a question, maybe topic, or and we see this a lot in politics, right?
Right.
where someone, or maybe even a CEO, you typically see it on that end, someone is asked a question and they just don't want to answer that question for whatever reason that may be. They sit there and freaking dance around the topic
Right.
for 10 minutes, not making much sense of anything, nor answering the question, but it sounds nice at times, you know.
Well, when I was kind of trying to get to the bottom of this, because I thought, all right, what's the chance that the term word salad just kind of came about over the last 18 months, you know, with a lot of the political rancor and stuff we see on TV. That's where I've noticed it. It's where it's been presented to me. So I thought, what's the chance that something like this is brand new? And so I went in and did some research. Come to find out, it's not new at all. It actually dates back to early England, and addresses some of the aristocracy who got into that latter part of what you talked about, thinking that the general populace wasn't going to understand it or didn't need to know, so they would manipulatively just kind of speak, you know, all this academia, trying to get through whatever time they had, you know, up in front of a crowd.
Yeah, when we started this discussion, I never thought in a million years it would go in the direction of you bringing out the Knights of the Round Table.
Right. Well, I don't think you would have caught a knight doing this, but some of the aristocracy certainly would have engaged in it. But interestingly enough, and I think one of the benchmarks of our accepted language in the country today is when certain entities like Webster's Dictionary adopts a word. When they say, okay, this is an official word, we're putting it in the dictionary, whether it's a word or a two-phrase, you know, word, or, you know, phrase, something like that. When they do that, it becomes sanctioned, you know, is like, this is a usable word. This is not just slang or something that somebody's throwing out there because they heard it from somebody else. And that actually got done by Webster's back in April of 2017. So still kind of early in the course of our language.
In acceptance.
Right. But it's a, you know, if you look in a modern dictionary now, you're going to find it. So when I started looking at this, the first thing, and it's all over Google. I mean, if you just type in word salad and put parentheses around it, because otherwise, you know, they try to separate it out and you get a bunch of junk you don't need. You find all these references to schizophrenia and other types of mental and psychological problems that affect people's ability to speak. So you just get a lot of, you know, vomiting in the mouth kind of stuff coming out. And that's where that origins come from. But I would submit that in everyday walking around, engaging with people, doing business, all the kind of stuff that you and I and millions of other people do, you know, for a professional life, word salading takes place. And there's other reasons why it does. So you kind of stepped on one, you know, that we were talking about from a manipulative standpoint. And I definitely believe that everybody listening here today has probably been in a situation where some highbrowed individual, some overly, you know, educated person has just waxed on indefinitely and never addressed a simple question. You know, you ask them what time it is, they tell you how the Swiss watch industry was formed. But I think there's other reasons why average people lapse in and out of word salading. Can you think of a reason why that?
Meaning who don't have a neurological or a mental disorder.
Right. They don't have a mental problem. Right. They don't have a mental problem. Yeah. This is not a psychological show. Neither one of us are licensed to do this. So all we can do is kind of touch it on the surface. But just from a regular human interaction and emotional type setup, we're all emotional beings. We all have behaviors. What can you think of that would cause somebody to lapse into word salading just at a moment's notice?
So the two the two times where I have seen this come up most consistent, first and foremost, is someone who's nervous.
Yes.
So you can unfortunately, and look, and I felt this way myself, especially when I've had to give presentations or speeches. I mean, one time, just a couple of years ago, I gave a speech to about 250 people. It's nerve-wracking. You find yourself, unless you are prepared and you've planned and you're experienced in this, it's very easy to find yourself kind of just going on these tangents and talking, right? And
that's what they call going off script.
Right. But that's also why if you actually spend time looking at any advice on how to prepare for presentations or large scale discussions, they tell you to practice, and then time yourself. Because what happens is once people are up on the stage, if they have not done that practice, they tend to just kind of go all over the place. And then their presentation speech, whatever it is, ends up being twice as long.
Right.
So the nervousness factor, I think, is a huge piece. The second piece where I see people get in trouble here utilizing or deploying word salad is they're trying to make a point or they're trying to prove a point, and they may feel, whether this is accurate or not, but they may feel like they aren't necessarily the smartest person in the room or the smartest person on the topic.
Right.
So they feel like they almost have to kind of overdo it to prove that they understand the topic or they understand what's being talked about.
Right.
And it's just like, the more they talk, you just sit there and you just like, oh, stop.
Right.
Right.
Shut it down.
Right. Right. So I would say, long story short, and maybe that was my own word salad right there, nervousness and perhaps a lack of or trying to impress upon other people. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I saw in my earlier career consumer products, especially when you get into these high level executive type meetings where you're doing overviews and you're trying to fix problems, you're basically, it gets to the point where if you know somebody isn't either telling the truth because they don't know the truth or they're trying to avoid the truth, and you start needling them. Okay. And that's when you get a lot of this stuff happening. And it's all pressure built. Either the individual feels it or it's been exerted on them, but it causes them to just talk and kind of over talk it. Now, in one profession, and I know you've probably heard this before, but there's one profession within business that the longer you talk, the more likelihood you have of failure in the moment. And that's in the sales profession. Whoever talks last is the one that loses. And I've been guilty of it myself early on in selling when I was with General Mills and Lysol, of basically talking your way out of a sale because you don't know where to end the sentence.
Yeah. Okay. I love that you brought that up, because that's the first time since we started talking about this subject that I actually put that into my own world, right? From a sales perspective.
Right.
And you're 100% right. It's how often do you see when someone's given a sales presentation, they just start. The word I've always used, the older word is, it's like you said vomiting earlier. I've always used diarrhea of the mouth. Right. They just start features and benefits selling like crazy.
Right.
It's like, it can do this and it can do that. And they've completely lost track of, does the customer even give a shit about that?
Right.
And what they're actually doing is like you said, talking more, they're further digging themselves in a hole, because the person a lot of times on the other end is like, none of that means anything to me. You haven't bothered to actually ask about my pain points here.
Right.
That's actually a great scenario. So if someone's listening and you're in sales or you have suppliers, customers, whatever, that come sell to you, that's a great time when you can kind of pay attention to that, where someone starts word salading.
And the other one, and I see this quite a bit today in all of my networking, whether it's more of a formal engagement or whether it's just social activity, networking a lot of times does go social. I see people way too often getting so comfortable in the environment that they literally disengage the filter between their head and their mouth. And I'm sure everybody listening today has probably done this or have thought about this, but we all have we have two dialogues. We have the one that goes on in our head, and we have the one that we share with people around us. And the stuff that goes on in your head many times is not suitable for publication. You have to clean it up. You have to kind of condense it. You have to make it so it's understandable and it means something to the person you're talking to, as opposed to just bouncing around between your ears. But we all know people who literally have no filter. And sometimes it's just the way they are. They've never really thought about it. Maybe it's not been brought to their attention, or they're one of these ones that lives by this mantra, I have to say what's on my mind. Well, no, you don't. Because it's not always appropriate to be spewing out the stuff that's rattling around in your head.
But it's my piece, Father. It's my reality. You need to be subjected to it.
Right. So I think that you said it, nervousness definitely causes people to kind of just amble on forever. I think there are some times where people don't necessarily have neurological problems, but I think they're completely unaware and disconnected between their own inner talk and how they connect with people around them. And those are the folks, love them, a lot of them, but you sit in a networking event, and I run networking for our city's, Lake Forest Chamber. And every time we do these things, I start off by saying, okay, I'm not trying to be unfair to anybody, but when I give you the microphone, you literally have 30 seconds to tell us who you are and what you do, and then stop.
Oh my God, that right
otherwise
there,
it's going to take an hour, of a 90-minute lunch just to get through introductions.
That right there, I've never understood what goes on in people's heads in those moments. And maybe we chalk it up to nervousness. I don't know, to be polite about it. Exactly what you just said. You see this a lot at networking events, especially if it's a smaller group. All right, we're going to go around and we're going to introduce ourselves. What I have started doing is I want you to tell us 3 things. Your name, what do you do for a living, meaning job title, company, right, industry, one fun thing about you, right? 15 seconds at best.
Right.
Amazing how people can't do that. How it's like, well, let me tell you, I was on a vacation the other week with my 2 daughters, and this happened. Then Bobo, the little circus clown, came over, and it's like, what the?
Yeah, I know. Well, look, it gets back to something you said early on, though, about practicing, and whether it's formal practice, if you're going to be giving a talk to a group or a presentation to a customer or something of that nature. Or a lot of times what I tell folks is get in the habit of thinking ahead about what you plan to say. And even though that sounds a little cumbersome, if you start doing that, you'll be surprised at how easy it gets. So you're going into a networking lunch, right. You're sitting down, at some point, either the microphone's going to come around or somebody's going to point at you and say, sir, get up and introduce yourself. And it's that point in time where you got to say, okay, if nobody sets guidelines, these are my 3. My name, my company, what I do, boom. And if you can practice in your own area, then you will come off looking infinitely more professional by saying less than if you just kind of dribble on ad nauseum and have people be forced to tell you have to sit down. That's bad. Whenever that happens, I just want to just hide under the table.
I'm so glad you just said that. I mean, telling people that they have to sit down. We'll call it maybe a year ago. It was during COVID. I went to an outdoor networking event. That's a small medical device group that meets up. There's, maybe 25 people. Well, the person who put this event on, who's a very nice guy, made the mistake of, we're going to go around all 25 people. It might have even been 30 people. And we're going to introduce ourselves, and kind of did what I just said a moment ago. Name, what do you do for a living? What's a fun thing about you? So we got about halfway through it, whatever it was, maybe 10 minutes into it. And this one guy stands up and did exactly what you just said. He just starts talking. Of course, he does his name, what he does, but he, no joke, spent almost 5 minutes talking about things that he's passionate about, which was sports, and then spent another 2 to 3 minutes talking about how Kobe Bryant's death, unfortunate as it was, impacted him, and how this, and that, and how he has gone this. We're at a medical device networking event. And the worst thing was, you could see around the little group, people were like, somebody just put this guy out of his misery.
Right,
Come
right.
on.
They're all sitting there saying, somebody's got to take control of this runaway train.
But that's actually the worst situation. Was the guy who was running the event was not doing that.
Oh,
no,
okay.
No, but he wasn't taking control of his own event. So he's just letting this dude go on ad nauseum. Oh, it was just painful. And after the event, me and a couple guys who were there, we're sitting around having a beer, and that's the only thing we could talk about. So then the problem became, it completely distracted from what was all purposeful in terms of what the event was supposed to achieve. And that's all people were talking about afterwards. Right.
Because everybody's disgorging their own level of trauma over that.
Right. But real quick, I want to go back to a part we really haven't addressed yet, because I would really like to hear your perspective on it, not from the political end, from the business end.
Okay.
Why would someone use word salading as a manipulative tool or a strategy? I find that really interesting that, and I'm sure it happens, that there are people out there that are literally just going in circles because
Right.
they know that's better than addressing the question.
Right. All right. So here's my take. And again, this is not coming from any depth of psychology or anything. This is just practical observation over a long period of time with a diverse number of people in business. Okay. When I see somebody that's using the word salad strategy as a manipulative technique, what I see happening is somebody that has either been asked a difficult question or put on the spot, for who has an already inflated sense of self-worth, right? Their ego may be a little high, sometimes a little unchecked. So now they feel put upon, or possibly embarrassed because somebody thought to ask them that in public. And so not only do they avoid answering the question, but they do it in such a way as to strike back at the person who asked the question, to belittle them, to put them down, to make them seem somehow less sophisticated, less academically suited for the whole like, why would you even ask that? You're not even, that's above your pay grade. Why would you do that?
I love that.
That's why people do that.
Yeah. The flipping the script, that's a brilliant tactic, which everybody can see what you're doing. So
sure.
The funny thing is I see that more politically than I do within business, but it's just amazing today that a common approach is, rather than answering the question or even saying, I'm not going to answer that, which that's also, an option someone could take, is to literally just throw it back on the person who asked you the question and be like, I can't believe you would just ask me that. You should know the answer to that. The fact that you don't know the answer to that tells me a lot about your ability to understand your own profession.
Right.
And it's like, that's how it rolls
and on.
Right
it
there.
becomes
right.
a bludgeoning event. Yeah. I see this because I have some clients, unfortunately, that go down this road, and they'll get into discussions and they'll throw something out, from a sense of authority. Like, I know this stuff. I know what's going on. So they throw an opinion out there, and unbeknownst to them, somebody else in the group actually knows that area more than they do. And so you get a little pushback, a little authoritative pushback. And so now the individual feeling like, oh shit, I stepped in my own doo-doo in an effort to defend themselves and keep their image afloat. They will go back into history as far as they need to and recount every little detail that led up to the opinion that they served up as a justification. And so that can get that's a lengthy word salad, and you know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to, they're trying to defend themselves from a slight or an attack that makes them look bad. So I've seen that happen too. And, some people, and, again, God love them, but some people don't know how to keep conversations at a level playing field. They want to go too much into detail. And depending on the environment you're in, if you're in networking, you got about 3 minutes to get a story across before something's going to happen. A phone's going to go off. Somebody else is going to enter that little circle. Right. An announcement's going to get made. Something's going to break the conversation.
Yeah. Or just people's general attention.
Right.
I mean, today it's like, you can't even, most children, at least, you can't even sit in front of them for more than a minute before they're kind of doing one of these.
Right. So, all right. So let's talk about this for a few minutes. Let's say someone who's kind of guilty of this, and forget about why. All right, we'll throw the manipulative part out of the way, because there's a certain psychological thing that goes to constant manipulation. And I don't know that we really have the time to talk about that today, but let's just say people are doing it from nervousness or being unprepared or any number of things that would just cause them to ramble on. If you know somebody like that, and they have now realized that part of their problem, maybe they're not doing well in their job, they're not able to attract clients, it's because they talk way too freaking much. What would you offer up to them to help them curb that?
So I would use the same tactic that I've used with other things when I've been in management roles where I was trying to help one of my direct reports with some sort of professional development. The first thing, the first thing you got to really address is you have to be able to bring them into the awareness room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning if they don't see it for themselves, there's no way they can correct it.
Right.
So it would start off to some degree of bringing them into kind of like, hey, here's what I'm seeing. You know, on this specific time, on that time, I have seen you XYZ, right? And so you're giving them a very specific example. Hopefully it was recent. If you're telling them from 4 months ago, it's like that doesn't do anything.
Right.
So you have to be able to provide examples. And then the next step is, are you interested in improving this part? Hopefully they say yes. And then the whole next step is, well, because I'm willing to help you with that, here's how I would recommend we move forward. When I see you doing these things, I'll sit you down and we'll kind of talk through it. You share with me how you were feeling in that moment, because that will also help you understand maybe why you're doing these things.
Right.
You know, was it a nervousness thing? Were you trying to level up and improve people or impress people? Sorry. Then after that, it's trying to build their own awareness in the individual. Because the funny thing is, like, I just did it right there. The word like, which is a filler, that is something that I remember you were hammering on me for freaking years about that when I was in college. Like, hey, dude, like, what's up?
Right. Yeah.
You know, so the thing is, you can't improve something unless you yourself can catch you in the moment doing it.
Yes.
So you have to be able to help someone transition to that part where they're actually in the word salad moment and they mentally catch themselves like, oh shit, hold on, I've been droning on for the last 2 minutes. Let's, you know, as you said earlier, you know, kind of
right
down, right? At that point, then it just becomes practice. You know, and I think you would see people where if they know they're going into a meeting, they'll start rehearsing certain things, or they'll start, especially if they're going into a presentation, they'll start really getting down certain key pieces that they have to hit within that discussion. And then that just helps people bring in brevity while also just making sure that their point is crystal clear.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree. In fact, the only thing I would add to that is sometimes even after you get people to recognize what you're telling them, meaning the blind spot has been kind of pulled aside and now they see what you see. Sometimes even when you get people to that, there's no real guarantee that they're going to say, yeah, I see what you see, but I don't see it as a problem, or I don't see it as a big issue, or there's not enough on the line for them to be willing to change it, you know? So a lot of times after I get some confirmation that what I'm telling them is something that, yes, they can see it, or maybe, and usually what ends up happening is the first thing that comes back to me is, you know, other people have told me that over time. Okay, great. So what I'm telling you isn't the first time you're hearing this. So that right there should be a trigger. You know, if multiple people over time have told you that. The next thing I would seek to figure out is, do you recognize what you're doing to yourself, how you're not serving yourself well when you do that? And even point out some situations that you think might get them to realize there's a payment every time they do this, even if they don't think anybody else cares, or everybody knows that they do it and it's no big deal. Guess what? You're giving something up for that. Do you know what that is? Because once they realize there's a cost involved in doing that kind of stuff on a regular basis, then then they're going to take ownership for actually doing something different.
So I want to stop you there real quick, because, you know, in other episodes, we kind of, as we get towards the end, we always talk about kind of key takeaways.
Yep.
What you just said is my key takeaway for this discussion. So for those who are listening, if you think by chance you have an issue with word salad, the biggest thing you've got to remember is it's not just, oh, no harm, no foul, no big deal, right? We're all just talking like that's not, especially in your job, that's not the case. I would put it to you that the worst cost that you are accepting by continuing to do that is your own reputation.
Yes.
Right? Because
absolutely,
like I said, in that networking event that I was in, that's all we did was talk about the bullshit that this guy was spewing for 5 minutes that had nothing to do with the topic and literally distracted the whole event.
Right.
So that's all I'm now going to remember about that particular networking event.
That's right.
And look, it was a year ago and I'm still talking about it.
Well,
so it's like
and if this person is out there trying to gather up, from a professional reputation standpoint, trying to encourage people to refer them, when somebody else in earshot of that whole thing gets in a position where they could make a referral, the chances are you're not going to be the go-to. Right. They're going to think of all kind of other people to put in, because they're going to think, oh my God, I've got to find somebody that my client is really going to like and work with. And if I serve this individual up, not only is the client not going to be happy, I'm not going to hear from them again either, because they're going to be pissed. Right. So yeah, you're exactly right. You really got to understand the magnitude. Now, here's two things that I recommend to everybody to help slowly work on curbing this thing. One, remember, and this, I didn't come up with this, I borrow it a lot. Less is more. And especially when you're talking, less is more. Don't follow that attraction of diving into detail. Keep it at a surface level, because that's where people's heads are to start with. So until you get invited to go deeper, you got to keep it at the surface. And guess what? The most powerful thing you can do in any conversation, regardless of the reason you're having the conversation, is learn the strategic pause.
Was that it right there?
That was it right there.
Wait, for a second, I'm not joking right now. I can't breathe. I actually thought the Wi-Fi cut out for a second, and I was looking at your face like, well, is he still talking? What's going on? I was like, oh no, he's actually acting in this moment. That's right.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, but believe me, people, if you want to distract, if you want to take the pressure off yourself, institute a pause. It will change the direction. Somebody else will speak up, because a lot of people can't handle silence. So they will just automatically start the word salad process themselves if you allow that pause to go much longer than 3 seconds.
Yeah,
but it's a great way to,
it's like, take a freaking breath.
Yeah.
You're
breathe.
in a conversation with someone where they're just like, and I got to say this and this. And like, I feel like I'm just losing air for them. It's like,
oh my God. Yeah. So, I mean, none of this stuff is rocket science, but for people who perpetually fall into this problem, if you're not thinking ahead about what you want the outcome of any conversation to be, that's a problem right there. You're just walking into it blind. You're just going to fill in the blanks, follow the trend of whatever the conversation. That's a death trap, especially if you're prone to saying stuff that later on you have to send somebody an email or a text and say, yeah, I probably shouldn't have said that. But yeah, all this mea culpa stuff doesn't have to happen if you would just think ahead about where you want the outcome to be. And then if it's something more formal, you're giving a presentation to a group, you're speaking to a group, practice the damn thing. Have some outline of where you're going and just be brief. Just don't allow yourself to go off into the weeds, because that's usually where you lose track. And then that's when people start checking their watch and, looking to hopefully somebody's going to call them on the phone so they can leave the room. And, all those little cues start showing up when you go off script like that. So
counting the spackling on the ceiling.
Right. Or how many little light bulbs are in that really ugly chandelier in this room here. So, yeah. So, those are the kind of things. So, look, everybody has been exposed to this. It's made the public airways, certainly in the last 18 months, but from more of a ground level perspective, everybody has been in a situation where you've probably engaged in delivering a word salad and maybe didn't know it at that point. Or you've been the recipient of somebody disgorging their own word salad and you wish you could get the hell out of there. Now you know what this stuff is all about. And if you're not prone to it, but you're subject to it from other people, that's when you can figure out, what do I have to do to course correct for this individual, or just leave the room? Well, one of the two. Just if it's driving you crazy, you got to do something about it. But the worst thing you can do is, just say, hey, shut the hell up. You don't want to do that. But you do want to have that same kind of effect at getting them to snap into reality, because when you're word salading, you can look at their eyes and tell what's going on. They've lost contact with you. They're now all in their head having that internal conversation. It's just coming out audibly.
Yep. So takeaway, I'm going to go back to the cost for continuing this type of behavior and this type of communication is far greater than I think most people appreciate.
Yeah, I would
agree.
Because
as you had mentioned earlier, your reputation a lot of times is what produces open doors and opportunities.
Right.
So if people look at you as someone who can't be brief, can't get to the point, talks in circles, right? That for me is kind of a kiss of death with someone. And I, like you had brought up, I wouldn't refer business that way, or an opportunity that way.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you're talking about referring a lawyer and they charge by the hour or by every 6-minute segment or whatever, how that goes, and you got somebody that can't shut up, man, I mean, it's going to cost me money just to listen to this. Right. If you've got a consultant, you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to ever get them to stay focused on helping me with a problem I'm hiring them for, because they're all over the map. Right. So yeah, that's the part of word salading, I think, that causes people the most harm. The part that you mentioned early on, the manipulative side, which I totally believe is concocted, it's either self-preservation on their part or it's attacking you on your end. But those kind of people, you really got to decide, do I want them in my inner circle? Because, there's a trust factor there.
Right. Good talk.
All right. Yeah. Listen, hopefully everybody got something out of that. We appreciate you guys staying with us. As always, we broadcast new material every Tuesday at 4 p.m. And if you're not on our site, businesswingmen.com, or you're on our YouTube channel watching us, you can go to any number of podcast channels. I mean, you think of one, we're on there. Just get on there, type in Business Wingmen, and our page will pop up, and you'll get the same great content you would if you came to our website. So, Travis, what was the number? This one is what, number 77? I think this is 77. Yeah. So
that was not a strategic pause.
No.
I was thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So yeah, so there's a lot of great content out there. If you can just go back into our library. We also have an archive library, and down at the bottom of our homepage, there's a link there. It was with the original co-host that I had when Business Wingmen was formed about 3 years ago. And so we like to keep those there for people who want to go and listen to kind of the old show, because it was a little bit of a different format. But if you don't really care about that, you want to listen to more current, lively conversation that we have on these episodes, everything's right there on the homepage, or again, on any podcast channel you choose to use. So Travis, thanks for, this was a good topic today. I'm glad we teed this one up. I look forward to another one next Tuesday. So take care, everybody. We're signing off.